I'm Lucy, 20 years old, and I live with my family. This morning, I was preparing breakfast for my mom and dad. Everyone was still asleep. I thought we'd have a normal breakfast like every morning, but that's not quite how it went. As I was in the kitchen, I saw my brother walk in.
I'm Jake, 19 years old, Lucy's brother, and we've been together since we were kids. I usually have a hard time waking up, but this morning, I got up a little earlier. When I saw Lucy preparing breakfast in the kitchen, I couldn't help but watch her. I don't know why, but I was starting to enjoy just observing her.
When I saw him, I looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Jake. Want to help?" I asked, though I didn't really need it. But a little morning chat with him was always nice.
Good morning? I managed to say, but nothing else came out. I was watching her in a way I hadn't before, almost as if she were someone new. Her hair reached down to her waist, and she was wearing shorts. I didn't understand why she was catching my attention like this, but I couldn't take my eyes off her.
Finished up in the kitchen and moved to the table. Jake offered to help, and I have to admit, I was a bit surprised. As he started placing the napkins on the table, I began watching him from the corner of my eye. I felt a sudden urge to tease him, so I lightly tapped his shoulder and stepped aside. "Careful, Jake, don't scatter the napkins everywhere," I said with a slight smile. Then I slowly started picking up the napkins from the floor. He stood there, watching me with a puzzled expression.
When Lucy brushed past me and tapped my shoulder, even that brief moment unsettled me for some reason. I couldn't tell what she was up to, but as I watched her slowly pick up the napkins, I thought to myself, is she trying to provoke me, or am I just confused? I decided not to overthink it. Just as I reached for a plate, Lucy's fingers brushed over my hand, taking the plate right from me.
This time, I deliberately touched his hand as I reached for the plate. When I glanced at him, I caught that surprised look in his eyes, and it amused me. "Can you move a bit faster, Jake? You seem pretty groggy this morning," I said with a small giggle.
When she called me groggy, I rolled my eyes, but inside, I thought, no, she's definitely doing this on purpose. Yet, with each little joke she made, I found myself watching her more intently. It felt like I was looking for something behind her teasing, but I couldn't even admit it to myself. After sitting down at the table, the only thing I could do was focus my eyes on the table, trying not to let my thoughts get the best of me. A few seconds later, Mom and Dad woke up and came into the kitchen. As we sat down to eat, my mind was still spinning with everything Lucy had done. They quickly took their seats at the table, and we continued with breakfast. But my mind was still on Lucy. Lucy didn't come to the table, instead heading toward her room.
I was about to head outside when I realized I was running late. I pulled away from the kitchen and started heading to my room. Normally, I don't bother closing my door. This time, I didn't either. As I entered, I began changing my clothes slowly. But right at that moment, I heard Jake's voice, and I deliberately continued changing at a slower pace.
I was curious about what Lucy was up to in her room. As I approached, I noticed her door was slightly ajar. I couldn't help but feel a sense of intrigue as I peered through the small opening. I could tell she was getting ready, adjusting her outfit. My heart raced, feeling awkward in that moment. I knew I should respect her privacy, so I started to turn away. But before I could, our eyes met. She called me into the room. I was trying my best not to look at her, but it was impossible.
In an instant, he was so quick. As soon as I realized Jake had been watching me, I swiftly opened the door and pulled him inside. Grabbing him firmly by the collar, it was easy to pull him in. Seeing that look of surprise in his eyes was exactly what I was waiting for. I closed the door and shoved him toward it. "What are you doing?" I said, my gaze locking seriously onto his. I hadn't finished getting dressed yet. He couldn't look me in the eye. He was constantly scanning me, but that playful feeling inside me drove me forward. In that moment, everything changed. Just as I was about to push things further, I heard someone coming up the stairs. It had to be one of our parents. I released Jake, and he quickly ran back to his room. If our parents found out about this, it would be bad for both of us. I had to go out today. I was supposed to spend a few hours with my boyfriend, but my mind kept wandering. The events from this morning, the way Jake had looked at me, touched me. I couldn't shake it off. I spent time with my boyfriend, but it felt empty. That unease inside me just wouldn't go away. It was late when I realized I needed to head home. I had thought so much that I didn't even remember how I got there. I rushed upstairs to check if Jake was still asleep. I quietly cracked open his door and adjusted my eyes to the darkness. I saw that he was asleep. Why did I do that? What if he wasn't asleep? What would I have said? I stood there for a while, watching him. There was this strange feeling inside me. But it was as if something was missing. Maybe I just wanted to stay with him. I went to my room and changed my clothes, but my mind was still on Jake.
A while later, I heard Lucy coming into the hallway. She thought I was asleep. I had this feeling that something was happening, but I couldn't quite understand what it was. Everyone was asleep, and in the silence, my thoughts were a tangled mess. I kept pretending to sleep. I took deep breaths and tried to create the illusion that I was asleep. But at the same time, I was curious about what Lucy would do.
I decided to go downstairs for some water. My steps were quiet, I didn't want to wake anyone. I carefully entered the kitchen without turning on the lights. I grabbed a glass and walked over to the tap to fill it with water. But just as I was about to pour, I sensed movement in the dark and heard a sound. I almost screamed Jake, but stopped myself, feeling a chill run through me. Jake had entered the kitchen without turning on any lights.
I walked into the kitchen without turning on the light. Seeing Lucy there made everything click in my mind. I was so nervous, but I had finally found the courage I needed. Seeing the shock and fear on Lucy's face encouraged me to act. I adjusted my eyes to the darkness, approached her from behind, and wrapped my arms around her. I didn't know what I was doing, but I couldn't help myself. In that moment, I knew I couldn't turn back. I wrapped my arms around her waist and whispered in her ear, "Welcome, sis."
I hadn't expected Jake to suddenly hug me from behind. Where had he found the courage for that? But, oddly enough, I felt comfortable in the situation. I didn't know what to do or what to say, but everything felt different now. The surprise in my eyes had been replaced with something else. His calling me sis felt warmer now. When he whispered in my ear, I relaxed. "Hey." "Hi," I said, my nervousness quickly turning into joy. I let myself relax into Jake's arms, appreciating the closeness. Jake whispered, "How was your night?" That whisper affected me more than I expected. Just then, I think our parents heard something and woke up. Dad was coming down the stairs to check. I quickly called out, "I'm back. I'm going to bed now." Jake stepped back. Dad just nodded and went back to his room. Jake came back, smiling. "Good night, sis. See you in the morning," he said, before kissing me. It wasn't just a kiss on the cheek, it was more.
Just as I was about to hug Lucy, I heard a noise from the kitchen. I panicked, fearing that either Mom or Dad had woken up. I quickly took a step back, and the panic inside me intensified. I pulled back silently, making sure every movement I made in the dark was careful and deliberate. My heart was racing. I didn't know what to do. I was also afraid that Dad would come down the stairs to check what was going on. I need to hide, I thought to myself. I realized I was hidden in the darkness, so I cautiously watched as Lucy handled the situation. After Dad went back upstairs, I approached my sister. I knew that now the situation was in my control. I kissed her and whispered, "Good night, sis. See you in the morning." I could tell that what I did had made an impact on her. As I went upstairs, I could see that Lucy was still looking around, taking in everything that had just happened.
I stood up to go to my room, and as I walked down the hallway, I paused for a moment in front of Jake's room. My thoughts were forcing me to go inside. I opened the door to Jake's room slightly. I walked in and slowly closed the door again. I wanted to make sure Jake was asleep, but there was no sound coming from him. All I heard was Jake's deep breathing. I immediately approached him and said, a little hesitantly and quietly, "Hey, are you asleep?" But Jake was silent. He didn't answer at all. Something inside me was telling me to take more steps. I couldn't stop myself, so I slowly lifted the covers and lay down next to him. Slowly and carefully, I positioned myself against him and then pulled the covers back over us.
I am a person who falls asleep quickly. Again, I fell asleep as soon as I got into bed. But then I had a strange feeling, like I didn't fit in the bed I always sleep in. When I opened my eyes, I saw Lucy lying next to me. I was dumbfounded, trying to understand what was happening. I was stunned. When I turned my head, I wanted to call out, "Lucy!" But I decided not to break the magic of the moment and hugged my sister. We were so close and touching that I didn't want the night to end. I kept asking myself, should I take this further?
I felt Jake waking up, but I pretended not to notice. I felt a strange excitement inside me that I had never experienced before. While I was wondering what to do, Jake hugged me from behind. He put his arms around my waist and pulled me closer to him. I whispered, "Good night, Jack." We spent the whole night together and neither of us slept until the morning.